All right. Good morning. Good morning, Scott. Welcome.
Morning.
Um, so again, welcome everyone to our webinar on student voice. Rory, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Rory Wilson. I am an account lead with the Impact Group. So I have the privilege of working primarily with schools, which means that I also have the privilege of occasionally working with students on a lot of opportunities. So that's why I'm really excited to be on this webinar today, because some of my favorite projects and experiences in this role have been working with students, hearing their voice and just really interacting with them because they have such a unique perspective. So I do a lot more with schools, but I'm just excited to be here and talk with Phil and Scott and share some examples with you all.
Thank you, Rory. Scott, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Scott Musser. I'm the principal at Worcester High School.
Thank you for being here with us today as well, Scott. And I'm Phil Herman. I'm a partner at the Impact Group. I've been with the Impact Group for about 2 years. My entire career up until that point was in public education, mostly as a school administrator for 11 years as a superintendent. And so that brings us to all of you today, and we're just going to jump right in. Some of the things we're going to talk about is why is student voice important? Common ways to involve students and to capture student voice that we have seen in different districts that we've worked with. And then we're going to get into some of Scott's specific examples in terms of, as a school administrator, how does he capture student voice, and particularly looking at an example of an effort they have going on this year at Worcester. That has involved Rory and then Scott's leadership. And then lastly, we'll wrap up with some tips, and we'll do all that in the next 25 minutes. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So Rory and Scott, really, why is involving student voice important? Scott, you want to get us started there?
Yeah, so for me, I want to be able to service the students, right? Like, we're here, we should have a customer service mindset. And honestly, for me, I want the students to enjoy their experience, and I want them to take ownership in their building and in their school. And so for me, I want to hear what the students want to say. I don't want it to be a top-down directive or anything like that from me. And I want the kids to own the culture of our building. So, and I think the best way to get buy-in is to have their input. So that's kind of been just one of my philosophies from go. And I just enjoy working with kids. So I want to know what they have to say to me.
Yeah, thank you. Rory, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think students are just such a really special group because they are living in their schools every single day. They have such a unique perspective about, about their school culture, about the things that are going on there, and they can bring a lot to the table with their ideas. And a lot of times, all they really need is that avenue to be able to share their voice and then have that support from their school leaders to be able to, accomplish or see through anything that they might be really passionate about.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And Scott, I appreciate what you're saying about the ability for student voice to create that, like, a sense of belonging for students. And the other thing that does for you as a leader is it demonstrates that you care to students. And so you have the biggest population associated with your school stakeholders, and that's your students. And you're
Right.
demonstrating as a leader that you care by making their voices heard. And so that leads to better learning environments, it empowers students, and it really improves the practices or policies in a school.
Right.
Roy, what are some of the common ways we work with a lot of different schools, and what are some of the overarching ways or categories we've seen that that schools capture student voice?
Yeah, there are so many different opportunities, and really depending on the size of your school, kind of your community, your culture, what things you have set up. But there's really no barriers to ways that you can get your students involved and help them share your voice. But some of the really common ways that we see, and maybe these are some that you're all doing now, or maybe there are areas that you might want to start up. But one thing that we see particularly with communications when we're thinking about strategic planning or focusing on big initiatives, is giving your students a platform through feedback forms or surveys or even focus groups. If your school is embarking on a big endeavor like in strategic planning, bring those students to the table and just really hear what they have to say. So that's one really key area. Phil, I know you do a lot with focus groups and working with those students. If you had anything to add on that.
Sure. I mean, both doing student surveys, feedback forms, focus groups, those are all possibilities. We have many school districts that we do strategic planning with, and we always recommend that when we're doing focus groups, that they carve out some of the focus groups specifically for students. And those are some of the most informative focus groups, as you might imagine. They know better what's happening in the schools than just about anyone else. And so a lot of the other focus groups are focused on capturing perceptions. A lot of the student focus groups are really focused on capturing what's actually happening in a school.
So outside of engaging students through forms and surveys and focus groups, another really key area that we see is actually establishing a group for your students to express their voice. So a lot of times we see this through student councils or clubs or even leadership retreats. And Worcester actually has a really great group that they've formed to involve student leaders and bring them in on a lot of key things that happen within their high school. So we'll get into a little bit more of that later, but and we'll have Scott speak about the group that he's formed. But it's really powerful to be able to give your students that space, whether it is a club or, you know, a weekend retreat or some sort of opportunity to just get them together and get them talking.
Scott, I know we're going to look at a leadership group in your building here shortly. Are there other groups that have a particular voice at the high school in Worcester?
So yeah, so we actually started just because we're such a big high school, and I know there's bigger out there, but we're a pretty big school, and our student council actually does something called tacos, which I think is kind of interesting. It's like teams and associations, clubs, and organizations, and they all kind of come together for one like meeting periodically, because you oftentimes will have different groups working on different initiatives, and it's important that we have kind of some common thread, a common place for kids to talk about what's happening in each one of their groups. And so we actually then have a board where the kids are able to like post things that are happening. And so, hey, if you want to go to this event and support this team, or you want to do this or that. And it started and kind of spurred out of our student council and then took a life of its own. So I think that we're just trying to always involve the students and get them to become aware of what's happening in a school of 1,300. So it's good. I mean, we have 27 varsity sports, so it's hard to keep things kind of know what's going on at all times, but we're really empowering the kids to take that platform. They've made online presence known. They have their own Twitter account and their own Instagram account. They are posting. The students have taken charge of that. So it's been a really good event and a really good way for the kids to kind of manage their own activities within the building.
Yeah, thank you. Rory, another great example of this, Brian Wilch at Hudson High School for many years was a master of getting focused or feedback from the leadership retreat each year. So he would have 120 students on the leadership retreat and would capture their feedback about what's going well and what needs to be improved. And then he would come back to them with that list. He share that list with the staff and say, here are the things we're focusing on, and then would come back to the students periodically throughout the year in regard to how that progress is coming along. And that was a year in, year out practice of taking a leadership group there, or and getting their voice and then revisiting it with them.
Yeah, and that's such a key piece to give students that platform or give them that liaison to be able to spur those conversations. But in some cases too, the students can be that liaison themselves. And this is the case at Worcester. You all have student representatives for your board of education. Which is another really key area. And we see that in a lot of schools is, helping empower students to come to other groups, to other key functioning pieces of your district to give a report or participate, and just be part of that type of leadership, because seeing other leaders in action can really empower students to take on that same role. And we see that also with other big initiatives, not just with boards of education, but with different committees. Like if your school has, a big facilities project coming up, incorporating your students into that facilities committee, or maybe it's, whatever the topic may be at your school, but giving them a place to be part of that conversation.
Yeah, another type, I think, of student voice is the adult professional learning. That's a unique way of incorporating student voice. But we have seen examples of school districts that give students the platform to teach the staff, and whether they're talking about how to utilize social media or providing technology professional development. And if you think about that, our students can often run circles around our staff in regard to technology use. And there's incredible opportunities there to structure professional development from the students to the staff, or teaching the staff lessons on instructional practice. This is how do we most like to learn. That's another form of involving student voice.
Yeah, and on that same topic of technology, I mean, kids are so comfortable with, just really easy, accessible tech. Like think of like your phones, your laptops, anything like that. So oftentimes they're really willing to get involved in different types of media projects. So another way you can harness your student voice is to use their literal voices. We've seen some really unique projects where you've got students that are part of video updates. They want to be using that technology and actually hearing from them out to the community. They can be part of community presentations, doing voiceovers, or even for a time, participating in the district social media, running that. I know Scott mentioned that a lot of the clubs are, those social media platforms are run by the students. So really letting them harness that technology and use it to share the things that they have to say.
Fantastic. So let's get into some examples at Worcester. Scott, historically, as a school leader, how have you incorporated student voice? And then we'll move into the specific project you have going on this year, which is a great example.
Yeah. So since I've been in a principal school leader, I've always tried to form at any district I've been at a student leadership team. And so what I tell the students is like, hey, you've got the ear of the principal. I want to hear what you have to say. I want to meet with you and understand what's going on. And so it's different than any of the other clubs. At Worcester, we've made it grades 10 through 12. It's about 25 students. And it's not just let's come to the principal and complain. Like it's about growth, taking ownership, in empowering the kids, building leadership capacity. So we have partner with an outside organization that comes in and does things like implicit bias training with students. We've talked about crucial conversations and what does that look like, and how do we navigate those as young leaders, and then we also try to say, hey, well, what's also going on in the school, and what do we want to talk about, and what are some things we could fix or work on or have an impact with. And so the students have been really instrumental in a lot of things around the building, but I just find it very valuable to also, it's my own, I mean, this is why I'm in education, is to be with kids. It's my way to stay in touch with the student body, because oftentimes it's easy to kind of fall into those day in, day out things that you do as a school administrator.
Yeah, fantastic. And so you have a unique project going on this year with your students regarding the Worcester mascot. And it's a great example of student voice. Can you and Rory tell us a little bit about what's going on there, and how did that get started? How did it come to be? And then what structure have you put in place this year for gathering feedback and hearing their voice?
Yeah, great. So Worcester has a mascot, we're the Generals, and it's named after David Worcester, who is a Revolutionary War general. And so with that, our mascot, like most mascots, has changed and evolved throughout time since it was first adopted. The last version of our mascot was done in the 90s, and he does not symbolize a Revolutionary War general. And so what we've tried to do is figure out, do we need to change the mascot or not, knowing that branding and mascots are a really big part of a school's identity. So I actually went to the student leadership team and I started there and I said, hey guys, what do you think? What is a mascot? We did a whole series on brands and rebranding and relabeling and looking at different brands and how they've changed, whether it's from Coca-Cola to Pepsi to, different groups and organizations over time and how they've changed and why. So we did a whole series on that, and then reached out to Rory and said, hey, we want to do this the right way. We want to make sure that we're, sensitive to all as we're doing this, and we're not jumping the gun based on a few. So we designed, with Rory's help, we designed a plan to kind of execute and go through a multi-step process on whether we're going to move forward or not with a rebranding and a re-innovation of a mascot, because the kids were like, yes, the guy needs to have a feather, or yes, the guy needs to do this, or we need a horse, or we don't. So they were very much into the details of, let's change the mascot and let's make him have these features. But we never got to the, do we need to change a mascot or not? And so with that, Rory came in, her and someone else came to the school. They met with the students. We talked about the process. We walked through it. We built survey questions with the students, and we rolled out a student survey to see if the student body wants to have a change in their mascot or not. And so it's been interesting. We're in the data collection phase. I'm actually meeting with my student group next week to discuss the survey results with them and kind of walk through it. And it's an interesting split because 55% of the student body right now is saying, no, we like our mascot, leave it alone. And 45 is saying, yeah, we need to change. So we kind of need to look at some things as a group and kind of get some action steps to move forward. But that's kind of where we've walked through this. I don't know, Rory, did I miss anything?
No, I think that was a great summary of the project. And I think one of the things that has been so exciting about this is that it truly is student driven. I mean, the thought behind the change came from your student leaders. And furthermore, they are truly executing the work. The impact group, obviously, we're no stranger to rebranding or logo design or, any of those wonderful things that come along with having a brand. But I think what the really special piece is here is that Scott didn't ask the impact group to do this on their behalf or to do it for them, but to truly help empower those students to let them drive a possible change. Which is so unique. And there's so many areas, that maybe students are really passionate about. And this one just happens to be in the communication sphere. But it's been really fun to come alongside the students and kind of give them a background so that they can then execute their survey and talk to their peers, and just really be able to be the drivers of that.
Yeah, and that's a great example of truly engaging students in meaningful change for their school district or for their high school, and involving their voice, and really what a real hands-on learning experience for them too, is in terms of just working with experts in the area about the components that go into rebranding or rebuilding a mascot, but actually doing the work themselves. And so again, it's embedding learning experiences with hearing their voice as well. So we're excited to see the outcome as the year goes on. That's an exciting one. Let's talk about some of the tips for involving student voice, and then we'll open it up for any questions before we wrap up. But Rory, what are some of the tips that we would share with any school district, any school leader that is thinking about how do we better involve our students' voice?
Sure. So, right off the bat, one really easy way to do that is to just celebrate their participation. You know, sometimes you've got really natural student leaders who are very outgoing or willing to participate, but sometimes you kind of have to, be a little more encouraging to get that participation, even from some of those more outgoing kids. So, just really celebrating their participation, thanking them and highlighting their work, and just, really showing, um, how valuable it is. And that level of encouragement through celebration of their participation can be so, so valuable. Another is to just really honor that commitment of time, that they're taking time out of their teenager lives, or, whatever. And we all know there's lots of other things that come with that. They've got, their activities and schoolwork and things like that, but just really honoring that commitment, by recognizing them. And we know the way to kids' hearts is a lot of time with food, but that can come along with kind of the attention or the special thing that comes along with it. I think, Scott, in your case, each of the students on your leadership team really recognizes that it's a privilege to be in that group. And that can be an honor in itself, is just kind of making it special for them, and helping them to really feel like they are standing out, to help their peers, to help their school as a whole. And then another really key piece of this is, if you're willing to have students share their voice, you have to be willing to act on that voice. So if you open up the student body to be able to share their thoughts, their opinions, their feedback with you, don't make it a symbolic effort. Really put the intention behind making those things happen for them if it's possible. And in this case, that's exactly what Scott's done with his leadership group is, and it turns out the results we're getting are kind of 50-50. Will the mascot change? We don't know, but that's something that's been shared with them from the get-go is, if you see that there's a need, we will address it and we will take it as far as we can. But at the end of the day, we're going to respond to what the entire student body wants. But just really being able to act on that voice from the beginning. And then lastly, just have fun. Students are so creative and unique and just a joy to be around. Let your time working with them or reaching out to involve them just be a little fun, and take advantage of that opportunity.
Scott, you want to comment on any of those tips and how they've gone into play for you, or additional tips that you have?
No, I think that's great. I said, the one thing that I will say, like when I chose the student leadership group and we wanted to get it going, we were really intentional on the kids that we chose. I didn't want the kids who were always in the leadership spotlight. I didn't want the star athlete always, or the student who is always the best kid in class, right? Like I was very intentional on choosing students from diverse backgrounds. We have students with disabilities. We have all cultures, different religious sectors. Like it was very intentional to get a really diverse group, because I also want the students to realize, like with diversity, we have a bigger movement forward. And so for me, I think that's something else to remember, is to choose the kids who maybe don't always get that spotlight shown on them, because they're looking for an opportunity to shine too. And sometimes these are great situations where you can hear them and hear what they're going through and hear what their thoughts are about your school culture and climate.
Yes, and we talked a lot today about some of the intentional structures and formal structures for hearing student voice, and we believe you should be intentional about getting student voice. At the same time, there are many informal ways to get student voice. I think some of the best feedback I ever received was just consistently eating lunch with students. Just sit down at a table with students, from elementary students all the way up through high school students. Periodically go into their lunchroom, go to their space, sit down, start eating lunch with them, and just have conversation about what's going on in their world. They will tell you. Coming back to the having fun, it is fun. It's fun to engage with them on that way, and you'll get many nuggets about what's going on in the schools, and how they feel about their learning environments. So again, today, you know, we've talked about the why and the importance of creating that sense of belonging for students by empowering them and hearing their voice. We've talked about some of the how, the common ways. So we would encourage you think about feedback forms, surveys, focus groups, creating deliberate groups that have a student voice, like a student council or a leadership team, or an advisory council to the superintendent or the principal. Student representation, like on boards, providing professional learning where they get to lead the professional learning for the adults in their buildings, as well as literally use the student voice in your communications process. Remember those tips: celebrate students' participation, honor their commitment, act on their words, be willing to act on the feedback that they give you, and mostly have fun. We will wrap things up there. Scott, thank you so much for your time and your example of how to engage student voice. Rory, thank you for facilitating so much of the conversation today. We'll pause. We'll stay on if anyone has a few quick questions before we hang up. But thanks to those of you who tuned in. All of our webinars are recorded as well and put out on our website. And that's where many people choose to come in on their own convenience and check these out as well. So thanks for being here today for those of you on the call. Any questions before we conclude?
I do have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead,
Okay,
Natalie.
I'm Natalie. I'm from Fairport Harbor Schools,
Yeah.
and we're a very small community.
Yes.
And my question maybe for Scott is, how do you balance the community voice with the student voice? If we came in and said, our students have decided we're going to change the mascot, it would be a really rough conversation for our community. So how do you, like, hypothetically, they said, we're going to change it. At what point do you consider your community involvement?
So we started with a student survey. It was completely internal. And so before I would move external, I would want to know that I've got the bulk of the student body behind a decision like that, because that's something that's a little bit easier for me to defend to a community member who might be upset. I know that, you know, when they wore that mascot on their jersey 35 years ago, those are the glory days, right? And sometimes that's tough to move off of that. But there also are times when it is time to update and it is time to change. And so I think it would have to depend, and you know, you probably know your community far better than I would, but each community is unique and they are different. And so I think having that, you know, that buy-in from the students, and then most likely if you have the buy-in from the students, you have it from the families of those students, that starts to be kind of your grassroots movement on something like that. But I absolutely wouldn't be able to just say the student body is going to change the mascot and not engage the community. That would be a suicide mission for me. So we would have to be very thoughtful, and we would have to be very methodical on how we would kind of walk through that and engage the community, maybe through community surveys or open houses, or, you know, coffee talks or whatever it might be, to try and get their feedback as well to gain some of that. I don't know, Rory, if you have any ideas too.
Yeah, I think and we kind of loosely walked through our process on this. Obviously, it's a very specific example, but kind of the final culmination, we decided should the student leadership group go through their research all the way through, you know, that survey, analyzing those results, telling the story of what a mascot change would mean. And then, you know, ultimately coming up with a new design for that mascot. Kind of the culmination of that would be a presentation to the board, and having those student leaders bring their research and their work to the Board of Education to say, you know, this is what we've done. This is the research that we've taken away, and this is what we've come up with. So ultimately it would be a recommendation, at which point the community as a whole would be involved.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Any other questions as we wrap up? Again, thank you all for joining us this morning. Hope you have a fantastic Thursday. Enjoy the rest of your week.